She said it between bites of lasagna, as if she was commenting on the weather. "You're not family anymore, Leah. You made that choice when you walked out." My mother didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look at me. Just picked up her wine glass, clinked it against Ava's, and smiled. The room went still. Knives hovered midair. Even Uncle Dean, who hadn't stopped talking since he arrived, went quiet. I could hear the fizz of soda in someone's glass. She chose my birthday dinner. My birthday. All our relatives were there, family, friends, even my old piano teacher. The cake hadn't been cut yet. My name was on it in perfect cursive frosting. But apparently, I wasn't part of the family anymore. I set my fork down carefully. The metal clinked against the ceramic plate with a sound that seemed to echo through the dining room. I folded my napkin, placed it beside my untouched meal, and stood up slowly. Every eye in the room followed my movement, like they were watching something break in slow motion. I didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been decided for me. Nobody stopped me. Nobody said my name. I walked out of the dining room and into the night air, like I was walking off a stage I didn't audition for. The front door closed behind me with a soft click that felt louder than any slam could have been. No one followed me. Not even my father, who used to tell me I was his little warrior when I was small. Not Ava, who once promised we'd always be sisters no matter what. Not Uncle Dean, who had taught me to change a tire when I was 16, because he said every woman should know how. The street was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. Porch lights glowed warm and yellow from houses where other families were probably having normal birthday dinners, where daughters weren't being erased from existence over dessert. I walked to my car, my heels clicking against the concrete driveway. Behind me, through the dining room window, I could see silhouettes moving around the table. Life continuing. The party going on without the birthday girl. I drove home to my small studio apartment, where the only family photo was one of me and my grandmother from years ago, where I belonged to myself. I'm Leah Morgan. I'm 27 years old. And until 2 months ago, I lived in the guest room of my parents' perfect suburban house. The room with the pale yellow walls and furniture that never quite felt like mine, even though I'd slept there for most of my adult life. I paid rent on time, every month, straight into my mother's account. I cleaned the bathroom I shared with no one. I cooked dinner twice a week and always did my own laundry. I worked remote, freelance hours from my laptop at the kitchen table, hours that no one respected because the work didn't happen in an office building. I moved out in silence 2 months ago. I didn't make a scene or leave angry notes. I found a small studio apartment across town, paid the deposit myself, and packed my belongings into boxes while my mother was at her book club meeting. I left behind a house that never quite felt like home, no matter how long I lived there. Apparently, that simple act of independence meant I was no longer family. That moving into my own space somehow canceled out 27 years of being their daughter. The logic of it still escaped me, but the message was crystal clear. Ava is 2 years younger than me, and she has always sparkled in the light our mother set up specifically for her. She was class president in high school, cheer captain, homecoming queen. She sailed through dental school on a combination of natural charm and parental funding that never seemed to run out. When I did something right, it was expected. When Ava did the same thing, it was miraculous. When I got straight A's, my mother would nod and say it was good that I was finally applying myself. When Ava brought home a B+, there would be celebrations and phone calls to relatives. She has perfect skin that never needed expensive treatments, a laugh that makes people lean in closer, and a way of making every conversation about her without anyone noticing. She still lives at home in her childhood bedroom with the princess wallpaper, and my mother still does her laundry. Guess which one of us still gets their groceries paid for? Guess which one gets their car insurance handled and their student loans mysteriously disappearing from family conversations? The golden child never has to leave the nest because the nest was built specifically to accommodate her wings. Growing up, I wasn't hugged unless there were guests watching who expected to see a loving family in action. I was smart when it helped the family look good at school events or neighborhood gatherings. I was too sensitive if I asked for emotional space or expressed any feelings that made others uncomfortable. I was difficult whenever I disagreed with decisions that affected my life, and I was ungrateful when I pointed out the obvious favoritism that everyone pretended didn't exist. Love wasn't unconditional in our house. It was transactional, something you earned through usefulness and lost through inconvenience. I folded laundry without being asked and ran errands that everyone else was too busy for. I kept family secrets and smoothed over conflicts that others created. That's all they ever really needed from me. Maintenance. I was the daughter who fixed things quietly, who didn't require investment or attention, who made life easier for everyone else by simply handling whatever needed to be handled. Emotional support was reserved for the daughter who sparkled. Practical support was my specialty, whether I wanted it or not. 3 days after the birthday dinner, no one called. No apology text from my mother. No awkward attempt at reconciliation from my father. Not even a casual check-in to see if I was okay after being publicly disowned at my own birthday party. Ava posted pictures from the party on social media like nothing had happened. The cake cutting. Uncle Dean telling his fishing stories. My mother laughing at something someone said. I was cropped out of most of the photos, erased as efficiently as I'd been dismissed at the dinner table. The images looked warm and festive. A perfect family celebration with perfect lighting and perfect smiles. You'd never know that the birthday girl had been officially removed from the family roster between the main course and dessert. In one photo, you could see the edge of my empty chair, pushed back from the table at an odd angle. That's all that remained of my presence. A piece of furniture out of place. I stared at those photos for longer than I should have, looking for some sign that my absence mattered. Some indication that the celebration felt incomplete without me. But everyone looked genuinely happy, genuinely whole. A friend from college messaged me the next week. Hey, are you okay? Your sister said something about you having a breakdown? The message came with concerned emoji and a tone that suggested she'd heard more than she was letting on. Ava had been busy. Not just posting edited photos, but actively explaining my absence to mutual friends and family members. According to her carefully crafted narrative, I had moved out because I couldn't handle adult life. I'd been struggling mentally and emotionally. Our parents were trying their best to support me through this difficult time. It wasn't just character assassination. It was strategic reputation management. She was getting ahead of any story I might tell by painting me as unstable, unreliable, and untrustworthy. If anyone heard my side later, they'd already been primed to see it as the ravings of someone having a mental health crisis. The brilliance of it was how reasonable she made it sound. How concerned and loving she appeared while systematically destroying my credibility. Anyone who questioned the family's behavior could be told that I was going through something, and that they were protecting my privacy by not sharing details. I screenshot the message and started a folder on my phone. Evidence. A letter from the bank arrived 2 weeks later, thick and official looking. My old joint checking account, one I'd forgotten was co-signed by my mother when I was 17, had been emptied. The final statement showed a clean zero balance after years of small deposits and careful savings. Almost $6,200. Gone. My mother had transferred it quietly, legally. The account was technically hers since she was the primary holder. I'd just been a secondary user for convenience, back when I was in high school, and needed somewhere to deposit my part-time job paychecks. I'd forgotten about changing it when I turned 18, then 21, then 25. It had seemed unimportant, like so many small ties that bind families together. Just a minor piece of financial infrastructure that I'd never thought to update. The timing wasn't coincidental. 3 days after my birthday dinner, she'd walked into the bank and cleaned out an account that represented years of my careful saving. Money I'd put aside for emergencies, for independence, for a future that was supposed to be mine. I didn't even call her to ask why. I just saved the document and added it to my evidence folder. Suddenly, mail started disappearing from my new apartment. Nothing major, just small things. A magazine subscription that should have forwarded. A package that the tracking said was delivered but never appeared at my door. Strange coincidences that felt too purposeful to ignore. Then my father casually texted me to ask where I was working now. A question that seemed innocent enough, except he'd never shown interest in my freelance career before. For 3 years, he'd referred to my work as playing on the computer, and asked when I was going to get a real job. But suddenly he wanted details about clients and contracts and my business setup, questions that felt like fishing expeditions rather than genuine parental interest. My mother started showing up at places I went regularly. The grocery store where I shopped on Tuesday evenings, the coffee shop where I worked from my laptop on Wednesday mornings. Always with a surprised smile, and an "oh, what a coincidence" that felt anything but coincidental. They were mapping my new life, cataloging my routines, keeping tabs on someone they'd officially written off as family. Control has nothing to do with love, but everything to do with possession. I could have confronted her about the money, the surveillance, the character assassination. I could have demanded explanations or family meetings or mediated conversations about boundaries and respect, but she wanted that reaction. She was counting on it. She wanted the scene, the breakdown, the angry daughter making demands and losing control. The proof that I really was unstable, just like Ava had been telling everyone. She wanted me to come crawling back, desperate and emotional, willing to apologize for things I didn't do and accept blame for problems I didn't create. She wanted the power that comes from being the only one who can offer forgiveness. So I did something worse than confronting her. Something she hadn't planned for and couldn't control. I stayed silent. I didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up at family events demanding to be heard. I didn't defend myself against the rumors or correct the narrative that was being carefully constructed around my absence. Silence, it turns out, is the most powerful response to people who feed on drama and chaos. I'd been working with a quiet, high-net-worth client for almost a year. Strategy consulting for a private equity firm that valued discretion above everything else. It wasn't the kind of work you advertise on social media or discuss at family dinners. The contract was substantial, steady, and growing. I was earning more than most people with traditional jobs, more than Ava would make for years as a dental student, probably more than my parents' combined income from their part-time teaching positions. I never mentioned the specific numbers because I'd learned early that financial success, when it came from me, was either dismissed as lucky or resented as somehow unfair. Better to let them assume I was getting by on freelance scraps while I quietly built something real. My mother thought I was playing pretend at having a career. She had no idea I was not only surviving independently but thriving in ways she couldn't have imagined. The studio apartment was just the beginning. I had plans that extended far beyond proving I could pay my own rent, plans that didn't require anyone's approval or financial support. Security came from building something that couldn't be taken away, controlled, or diminished by other people's opinions. I started gathering things systematically: screenshots of social media posts, bank statements and transfer records, text messages and DMs, the timeline of strange coincidences and surveillance attempts. I wasn't collecting ammunition for revenge. I was building documentation for protection. There's a difference between wanting to hurt someone and wanting to shield yourself from being hurt again. Every family has its unofficial historian, someone who remembers what really happened when everyone else's memory becomes conveniently selective. Usually, that person is dismissed as holding grudges or being unable to let things go. But sometimes having a detailed record becomes essential, especially when the official family story gets rewritten to exclude inconvenient truths. I created folders on my laptop with dates and categories: financial abuse, surveillance, character assassination, emotional manipulation, not because I planned to use them as weapons, but because I finally understood that being naive about other people's motivations only protects the people who want to hurt you. Documentation is just truth organized efficiently. Truth that stands independent of other people's willingness to acknowledge it. One Sunday morning, 3 weeks after the birthday dinner incident, Ava texted me directly for the first time since the night I walked out. "Mom said we should have lunch. She's willing to talk if you're calmer now." The message was perfectly crafted. No apology for what had happened. No acknowledgement that anything inappropriate had occurred. Just a generous offer to talk, conditional on my emotional state being acceptable to them. "If you're calmer now" implied that my reaction had been the problem, not their behavior. That I'd been dramatic or hysterical or unreasonable, and now that I'd hopefully gotten it out of my system, the adults could have a rational conversation. No mention of the stolen money. No explanation for the social media narrative. No recognition that being disowned at your own birthday party might justify some level of upset emotional response. Just a test to see if I was ready to play my assigned role again. To apologize for inconveniencing them with my feelings and accept whatever conditional love they were willing to offer. I left her on read for 3 days. Then I left her on read permanently. I hired a lawyer. Quietly, discreetly, through a referral from my business client who understood the value of confidentiality. Someone who specialized in family law and estate issues, with particular experience in situations involving financial abuse and control. I had her review old documents I'd found in my grandmother's things after she passed. Legal papers that had been stored in my apartment since I'd handled her estate, papers that I'd never examined carefully because they seemed like ancient history. Turns out, the family trust wasn't as airtight as my mother thought it was. The vacation house she loved posting from, the cabin by the lake where she hosted family reunions and anniversary celebrations, wasn't actually owned by her, despite decades of acting like it was. The property was still held under my uncle's estate, and the legal documentation was surprisingly complex. More importantly, according to the will I'd helped execute 3 years ago, I was named as the estate executor, not my mother. She'd been using the property as if she owned it, but legally, she was just a beneficiary with limited access rights. Rights that could be modified under certain circumstances. Guess who had the legal authority to make those modifications? I didn't threaten anyone. I didn't hint at consequences or send warning messages. I didn't even let my mother know that I'd discovered the discrepancy in the property ownership. I just quietly contacted the security company that managed the vacation house and had the entry codes changed. Then, I contacted the property management company and updated the contact information for maintenance and emergency issues. Small legal, administrative changes that reflected the actual ownership structure, rather than the family dynamics my mother preferred. When she arrived for her planned weekend retreat the following month, the codes didn't work. Her key didn't fit the new locks. The neighbors who usually waved and brought over extra vegetables didn't recognize her authority to be there. She called the property management company and was told that access requests needed to go through the estate executor. She called the security company and got the same message. She never called me directly, but I heard about the situation through Uncle Dean, who thought it was hilarious that she'd been locked out of her own property due to some kind of computer glitch. I didn't correct his assumption about what had happened. Sometimes, the truth is more powerful when it speaks for itself. That's when the real chaos started, though I only experienced it secondhand through the family network of cousins and aunts who couldn't resist sharing drama. My mother sent me emails that started reasonable and escalated to furious within the same paragraph. Then she called and left voicemails that began with disappointment and ended with threats. Then she enlisted Ava to contact me with urgent messages about family emergencies that needed immediate attention. Ava posted a story on social media showing herself crying in a kitchen, tagged with vague references to family stress and people changing. Everyone who saw it knew exactly who was causing the problem, even though no names were mentioned. The narrative was evolving. I wasn't just having a breakdown anymore. I was actively hurting the family. I wasn't just struggling with mental health. I was being deliberately cruel and vindictive. But I still didn't respond to any of it. Not the emails, not the voicemails, not the social media manipulation. Silence continued to be my most effective tool. When people are used to getting reactions, the absence of reaction becomes its own kind of power. It forces them to escalate in ways that reveal their true character to anyone paying attention. Extended relatives started picking sides, though most of them did it quietly to avoid becoming target of family drama. Conversations happened in private messages and careful phone calls, away from the main family communication channels. I began hearing from cousins I hadn't talked to in years, people who had their own stories about being discarded or diminished by my mother's version of family management. They reached out tentatively, testing whether it was safe to speak honestly. One aunt messaged me directly, "I'm glad someone finally stood up to her. I've been waiting 20 years for someone to call her out." Another cousin shared a story about being excluded from a family wedding because she'd questioned my mother's version of events during a previous conflict. She'd been labeled as stirring up trouble and gradually frozen out of family gatherings. I started to realize how many of us had been quietly surviving her particular brand of emotional manipulation. How many family members had learned to stay silent, to avoid conflict, to accept whatever treatment they received, because speaking up only made things worse. The family tree was full of people who had been pruned away over the years, discarded when they became inconvenient or insufficiently grateful. A casual email landed in my inbox from someone whose name I didn't immediately recognize. It took me a moment to realize it was from a colleague of someone who knew someone. The kind of indirect professional connection that happens in small communities. My mother had applied for a position on the board of a local nonprofit organization, something prestigious that would look good on her social media and give her a platform to be recognized as a community leader. The person reaching out explained that they were doing some informal background research on candidates and had heard I might have insights about her character and reliability. They weren't asking me to lie or exaggerate. They just wanted to know if she was the kind of person who would follow through on commitments, work well with others, and represent the organization professionally. I didn't need to make anything up. I just sent them copies of public information. Screenshots of her social media posts over the past month, including the ones where Ava was crying about family stress. Documentation of the pattern of escalating demands and emotional manipulation. I included a brief, professional summary of my experience with her conflict resolution style and her approach to handling disagreement within family or organizational structures. When my uncle passed away unexpectedly, the extended family met privately to plan funeral arrangements and handle estate matters. I organized the gathering at my apartment, quietly working with the funeral home and family members who lived out of state. My lawyer handled the estate paperwork efficiently, transferring assets according to his will and settling final financial obligations. The process was straightforward since I'd been named as executor and had all the necessary documentation. My mother found out about his death from a forwarded obituary 3 days after the funeral. She hadn't been deliberately excluded, but no one had thought to contact her directly since she wasn't listed as next of kin or emergency contact. She called me that night, furious about being left out of family decisions that she felt she should have been part of. She demanded to know why she hadn't been informed immediately and insisted that there had been some kind of conspiracy to keep her away from family business. But the truth was simpler and more painful than any conspiracy. She just wasn't as central to family operations as she'd believed. When crisis happened, people reached out to the family members they trusted to handle things competently and quietly. She'd never been in that category, even before our current conflict. She'd been the family member people managed around, rather than relied upon. Ava sent one last message that revealed more than she probably intended. "You're being cruel. She's still your mother." The message came late at night, probably after my mother had spent hours processing the reality of being excluded from family decisions and discovering that her control over family resources wasn't as complete as she'd believed. But the phrase, "she's still your mother," was interesting. It implied that motherhood was a permanent license for unlimited access, that biology created irrevocable obligations regardless of behavior or character. It suggested that I owed forgiveness, tolerance, and relationship to someone simply because we shared DNA, regardless of how that person chose to treat me or others. I finally replied, but only to clarify the logic. She made that choice when I moved out. I used her own words, the exact phrase she'd used at my birthday dinner when she informed the room that I was no longer family. If moving out of my childhood home could end my family membership, then my family membership had clearly been conditional all along. Then I blocked Ava's number and removed her from all my social media accounts. I was done being managed, manipulated, or made responsible for other people's emotional reactions. I moved again, this time to a place I chose completely independently. A larger apartment with better light, in a neighborhood where I could walk to everything I needed. No family members knew the address. I upgraded my business setup with a proper office space and new equipment. I created a comprehensive will that distributed my assets according to my values rather than family expectations. I opened new bank accounts at a different institution and updated all my financial information to ensure complete independence. I bought a car that was entirely mine, with no co-signers or family connections to the financing. I've never been richer, quieter, or more at peace with my daily life. My work expanded through referrals from satisfied clients who appreciated my discretion and competence. I built friendships with people who chose to spend time with me, rather than people who were obligated to tolerate me. I discovered what it felt like to be appreciated rather than managed. Freedom, I realized, isn't just the absence of control. It's the presence of choice, and the knowledge that you don't owe anyone your pain, your energy, or your future, just because of shared history. 6 months later, I got a letter delivered to my business address. Handwritten, formal, with my mother's distinctive, careful script that she used for important correspondence. She was sick. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but serious enough to require treatment and recovery time. Ava had moved across the country for a prestigious dental residency program. My father was overwhelmed with managing everything alone and wasn't handling the stress well. Suddenly, I was missed. Suddenly, I was still her daughter, despite being officially removed from family status months earlier. Suddenly, my practical skills and reliable character were needed again. The letter contained no apology for the birthday dinner, no acknowledgement of the stolen money, no explanation for the surveillance and character assassination, just a careful explanation of current circumstances and an implied expectation that I would step back into my designated role. The tone was formal but entitled, as if she were informing an employee about a temporary increase in job responsibilities rather than asking a daughter for help after publicly disowning her. She needed my usefulness again, but she still didn't want to acknowledge my full humanity or address the ways she'd damaged our relationship. Just need, wrapped in careful language and delivered without humility. I agreed to meet her, but at a neutral location. A quiet restaurant downtown, where I knew the staff and felt safe. Where our conversation would be naturally limited by public setting and time constraints. She arrived precisely on time, dressed carefully as always, with the controlled composure she used for important meetings or difficult conversations. She cried almost immediately, explaining through tears how I had misunderstood everything that happened at my birthday dinner. How she had been protecting me from family drama that I didn't understand. How I had always been too sensitive and took things too personally when she was just trying to help me grow stronger. I just listened, without arguing or defending myself. I let her construct her version of events without interruption, watching how she painted herself as a misunderstood protector and me as an overreactive child. When she finished explaining away months of deliberate harm, she made her request. She needed to move in with me temporarily while she recovered from her treatment. Just for a few months until she was back on her feet and Ava could help more. That's when I handed her a printed copy of the trust revision documents, showing the updated distribution of estate assets and property access rights. She wasn't listed anywhere as a beneficiary or decision-maker. She looked at the papers for a long time, reading through legal language that must have been difficult to process emotionally. Her coffee grew cold, while she absorbed the reality that family resources she'd assumed were hers had been legally redistributed. The vacation house wasn't accessible to her anymore. The family trust didn't include her as a primary beneficiary. Assets she'd expected to inherit or control had been allocated differently according to actual legal ownership rather than family tradition. She looked at me across the table like I was a stranger, someone whose motivations and capabilities she had completely miscalculated. "You did this," she said quietly, not as an accusation, but as a recognition of power she hadn't known I possessed. I nodded. "I protected what was mine legally and distributed what wasn't mine according to the actual will, rather than family assumptions." For the first time in my life, she saw me clearly. Not as an extension of her will or a tool for family maintenance, but as an independent person with my own resources, judgment, and boundaries. I finally felt like a stranger to her too. It was the healthiest dynamic we'd ever had. The vacation home sold within 3 months to a young family who wanted to use it for summer retreats and holiday gatherings. The money went into a trust fund for my future children's education, managed by my lawyer rather than family members. Her application for the nonprofit board position was quietly declined, though no specific reason was given. Her reputation as a reliable community leader had been damaged by the public family conflicts and social media drama. The network of extended family relationships she'd spent decades managing began to operate independently, with family members connecting directly rather than going through her as a central coordinator. People just saw her clearly for the first time, without the careful narrative management she'd maintained for years. Not through slander or active destruction, but through the simple absence of protection from the natural consequences of her own behavior. I didn't destroy her. I just disconnected from being responsible for managing the aftermath of her choices. Peace, I discovered, isn't the same as revenge. Peace is what happens when you stop carrying other people's emotional chaos and start choosing yourself consistently. I am not angry anymore. Anger requires energy. I decided to invest elsewhere. I'm free. And if you've ever been the one they pushed out, you're not alone. Sometimes walking away isn't the end. It's the beginning of everything.